Oh my God, what happened?
It's not mine. We need to go.
Are you okay?
Come on.
Walked into the elevator at 11:47 p.m. and pressed the button for the 43rd floor, the same floor I cleaned every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 8 months. When the doors opened, Michael Reeves was standing there with a knife buried in his shoulder and blood spreading across his white dress shirt like spilled ink. He looked at me and then at the mop bucket I was holding, and I realized I had about 3 seconds to decide if I was going to pretend I saw nothing or if I was going to do something incredibly stupid. I chose stupid. I had moved to Boston from Manchester 18 months earlier with 2 suitcases and a work visa that took me 9 months to get approved. My cousin told me there were cleaning jobs everywhere and that Americans paid better than anyone back home. She was half right. The jobs existed, but the pay barely covered a shared bedroom in Dorchester and the bus fare to get to work on time. I worked mornings at a hospital changing linens and restocking supply closets. Afternoons I spent at a dry cleaning shop pressing shirts until my hands cramped. Nights belonged to Prestige Commercial Services, the company that cleaned Boston's high-rise office buildings after everyone went home. That job paid the most because the hours were terrible, and the supervisors didn't ask questions about immigration status. I was always tired, but I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I would save enough to take classes or start something better or at least move into my own apartment where I didn't have to share a bathroom with 5 other people. Then Michael Reeves stumbled into my elevator, and my entire plan changed. He was leaning against the wall trying to stay upright, and his breathing sounded wrong, shallow and uneven like he was forcing each breath through broken glass. The knife was still in his shoulder, and I could see the handle moving slightly every time he breathed. His eyes were sharp, though, completely alert, and he was watching me like he was calculating something. I set down the mop bucket and moved toward him without thinking about it. My mum had been a nurse at Royal Manchester before she got sick, and I grew up watching her wrap wounds and calm panicked patients in our kitchen. I never finished school, but I learned enough to know that pulling the knife out would make things worse. "Stay still," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I need to see how deep it is." He didn't move, but he kept staring at me with this strange expression, curious and cautious at the same time. I grabbed the cleanest towel from my cart and pressed it around the blade to slow the bleeding. He winced, but he didn't make a sound. "You need a hospital," I told him. "No hospitals," he said, and his accent was local, Boston but expensive, the kind you hear in the financial district. "No police either." "That's a terrible idea." "Probably," he said, and then he smiled, which seemed insane given the circumstances. "But I don't have better options right now." I should have walked away. Anyone with sense would have hit the emergency button and let security handle it. But something about the way he was looking at me made me hesitate. He wasn't scared. He was watching me like he was trying to figure out if I could be trusted, and for some reason that mattered more than the knife in his shoulder. "Where do you need to go?" I asked. He gave me an address in Beacon Hill and told me his car was in the underground garage. I told him I didn't have a license. He said he didn't care. So I helped him into the elevator, took it down to the parking level, and found his car exactly where he said it would be, a black sedan that probably cost more than I would make in 5 years. I drove through the empty streets at midnight with a bleeding stranger in the backseat giving me directions in a voice that stayed calm even as he bled through my towel. When we reached the address, 2 men in dark suits appeared from nowhere and pulled him out of the car with practiced efficiency. I thought that was the end of it, that I would never see him again, and eventually convinced myself the whole thing had been some kind of exhausted hallucination. But 3 weeks later, an envelope showed up at the front desk of my building with my name written across it in clean block letters. Inside was more cash than I had ever seen in one place and a note that said, "For the hospital bill I didn't need, and for not asking questions, Mr." I asked around at the office building where I worked, but nobody would tell me anything useful. One of the older security guards finally pulled me aside after his shift and told me to forget it ever happened. When I pressed him, he looked genuinely worried and said Michael Reeves wasn't someone I wanted to know, that he controlled things in Boston that most people didn't realize existed, and that asking questions about him was a good way to end up somewhere unpleasant. I tried to take his advice, but 2 weeks later Michael showed up at the dry cleaning shop where I worked afternoons. He was wearing a suit that fit him perfectly, and his shoulder showed no sign of injury. He looked completely out of place standing between the pressing machines and the racks of plastic-wrapped clothing. "You're difficult to track down," he said. "I'm just trying to work," I replied, and my hands were shaking so I kept them busy folding shirts. "I know," he moved closer, "that's why I'm here. I wanted to thank you properly." "You already did. The money was too much." "It wasn't enough." He tilted his head slightly and studied me the same way he had in the elevator, like he was solving an equation. "Have dinner with me." I actually laughed because the whole situation felt absurd. "I can't. I have another shift tonight." "Not anymore," he said, and then he made one phone call that lasted maybe 30 seconds. My supervisor called 2 minutes later to tell me I had the evening off and that I would still be paid for the hours. I stared at him. "What did you just do?" "Made things easier," he said. "Are you hungry?" That dinner happened at a restaurant I would never have found on my own, the kind of place that doesn't have a sign and where you need to know someone just to get past the door. We were the only people there. He didn't talk about what he did or why he had been stabbed. Instead, he asked about Manchester, about my mum, about why I came to Boston and what I wanted to build here. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him more than I planned to. When I finally asked what he did for work, he said he managed investments and security consulting, which I would learn later was technically accurate but deliberately incomplete. What he actually did was control a network that connected people who needed things done with people who could make those things happen, and he had spent 15 years building an operation that touched every major industry in New England. But sitting across from him that night, I didn't see any of that. I saw someone who listened when I talked, who asked real questions and waited for real answers, who looked at me like I was worth his time and attention. "You're not scared of me," he said near the end of the meal. "Should I be?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because most people are," he said, "and they have good reasons. Maybe I don't scare easily. Or maybe you don't know enough yet," he said, but he was smiling when he said it. We started seeing each other after that, always in private, always in places where nobody would recognize either of us. He never told me the full truth about his work, and I never pushed him for it. I convinced myself I didn't need to know. He was careful with me, protective in ways that felt genuine, and he started helping with things I never asked him to fix. My rent got paid 3 months in advance. My work visa issues disappeared overnight. I moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. I knew it was dangerous. I knew I was ignoring warning signs. But I also knew that for the first time since moving to Boston, I felt like someone actually saw me as more than just another invisible worker passing through their world. 4 months after we met, he took me to a private rooftop garden overlooking the harbor. The city lights reflected off the water and the air smelled like salt and distant rain. He handed me a small black box, and when I opened it, there was a platinum ring inside, simple and perfect. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know you don't know everything about me, but I need you to understand something. I've spent my entire life building walls, and you're the only person who ever made me want to take them down." I should have asked harder questions. I should have demanded complete honesty. But I loved him, and I believed he was trying to be better than whatever he had been before. So I said yes. He told me we needed to keep the engagement private for a while, for my safety, he said. And I agreed because I understood that his world had dangers I couldn't see yet. I wore the ring on a chain under my shirt and went back to my jobs because I didn't want to be the woman who gave up everything to depend on someone else. That's how I ended up working the Back Bay Autumn Gala 6 months later. It was the biggest charity event of the season. 500 guests, every important name in Boston business and politics gathered in a historic ballroom to write checks and be seen writing them. I was assigned to champagne service, which meant walking the room with a tray and staying invisible while wealthy people ignored me. I was good at being invisible. I had practiced for 18 months. Then I met Victoria Hartwell. She was old Boston money, the kind of family that had buildings named after them and foundation boards they controlled through generations. She treated service staff like furniture and everyone knew to avoid her if possible. When I offered her a glass of champagne, she waved me off without looking. I stepped back, but another server bumped into me from behind, and my tray tilted. A single drop of champagne landed on her dress. She turned on me and her face twisted into something ugly and sharp. "You clumsy idiot," she said loud enough that conversations nearby stopped. "Do you have any idea what this dress costs?" "I'm so sorry," I started to say, but she wasn't interested in apologies. The slap came fast and hard across my left cheek. Her ring caught my skin, and I felt something warm run down toward my jaw. The ballroom went completely silent. 500 people stopped talking at exactly the same time and turned to watch the African cleaning woman kneeling in spilled champagne with blood on her face. "Get out," Victoria Hartwell said. "You don't belong here." I looked around the room at faces I would never forget, some curious, some embarrassed, some completely indifferent. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere near the back of the room. The crowd shifted and Michael Reeves walked through. He was wearing black and he moved like he owned not just the room but everything in it. His expression was perfectly calm, the kind of calm that meant someone was about to regret something. He stopped in front of me and crouched down so we were eye level. His hand touched my face gently, turning it toward the light so he could see the cut. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. I shook my head because I couldn't find words. He stood and turned to Victoria Hartwell. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Apologize," he said. She laughed, sharp and nervous. "Excuse me, do you know who I am?" "I do," he said. "Apologize to my fiancé." The word landed like a gunshot. Whispers erupted everywhere. Victoria Hartwell went pale. "You're what?" Michael reached down and lifted the chain from under my uniform, holding up the ring so the light caught it. "This woman," he said, "is mine, and you just put your hands on her." "I didn't know," Victoria stammered. "That's your problem," he said, and then he turned to the security staff standing near the entrance. "Remove her. Permanently banned from this venue and any property associated with Reeves Holdings." "You can't do that," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "My family owns half the board." "I own the building," Michael said, "and the catering company, and the foundation hosting this event. You're done here." Victoria's husband rushed over trying to smooth things over, but Michael ignored him completely. He turned back to me and held out his hand. "Let's go," he said. The car ride to his apartment was silent. I sat in the back seat trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand the weight of the name he had just attached to me in front of everyone who mattered in Boston. When we got to his place, he brought me inside and cleaned the cut himself with hands that stayed completely steady. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For what?" "For not telling you everything sooner, for letting you work in places where people could hurt you." His jaw tightened. "It won't happen again." "Michael," I said, "I didn't know you owned all those things." "I own a lot of things," he said, "and I control a lot of people. I should have been honest from the beginning." "Then be honest now." He sat back, and for the first time I saw something uncertain in his eyes. "My name is Michael Reeves. I run the largest private logistics and security network in New England. On paper, I'm an investment consultant. In reality, I'm what people call a fixer. I control supply chains, information flow, and access to things most people don't know exist. I decide who succeeds and who disappears in this city. My hands went cold, but I didn't look away. I've hurt people, he continued. I've destroyed careers and lives. I've done things in the dark that you can't imagine and that I can't undo. His voice dropped. But I've never lied to you and I won't start now. I should have left. Every rational part of me knew that. But I looked at him, and I saw the man who had listened to my stories about my mum, who had asked about my dreams like they mattered, who looked at me like I was someone worth protecting. "Are you a good person?" I asked. "No," he said without hesitation. "Do you want to be?" He reached for my hand and his thumb brushed across my knuckles. "For you," he said, "I'll try." The next morning, every news outlet in Boston ran some version of the same story. Michael Reeves publicly claims British fiancé at charity gala. Socialite banned from major venues. My phone exploded. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly wanted to reconnect. The cleaning company fired me immediately, terrified of retaliation they assumed would come. But Michael didn't flinch. He hired security for me. He confirmed our engagement in a brief statement to the press. He made calls that killed every negative story before it could gain traction. And when Victoria Hartwell's family tried to apologize and negotiate their way back into his good graces, he refused to even take the meeting. "Some people only learn through consequences," he told me. 3 months later, we were married in a small private ceremony overlooking Boston Harbor. It wasn't a fairy tale. I didn't become someone I wasn't. I became a partner to someone whose world was complicated and sometimes dark. But he kept his word. He protected me. He respected my boundaries. And slowly he let me see the parts of himself he had spent years hiding from everyone else. I started a foundation for immigrant workers in Massachusetts. He funded it without question. I pushed him to use his network for good when he could. He listened. And when people asked if I was afraid of him, I told them the truth. No, because he's more afraid of losing me. But 2 years in, something shifted. I started noticing gaps in his schedule, conversations that ended when I entered rooms, tension that he couldn't quite hide. He was being pulled back into something he had been trying to distance himself from, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on both of us. One night I found him on the rooftop terrace, staring at the city like it was a problem he couldn't solve. "You're going back," I said, "to whatever you were before." He didn't deny it. "There are things I can't walk away from, people who depend on structures I built. If I leave, those structures collapse and people get hurt. So you're choosing that over this." "I'm trying to protect both," he said, "but I don't know if I can." We stood there in silence while the city hummed below us, and I realized that loving someone didn't mean I could save them from themselves, that sometimes people carried things too heavy to put down no matter how much they wanted to. "I'm not leaving you," I said, "but I can't watch you disappear into something that will destroy you." He turned to face me, and his eyes were tired in a way I had never seen before. "I know," he said. 3 months later, I moved into my own place across the city. We didn't divorce. We didn't fight. We just acknowledged that some distances are necessary for survival. He still calls every week. I still answer. We still love each other in the complicated way people do when love isn't enough to fix everything. I run my foundation full-time now. I help people who moved here with nothing build lives that don't require them to stay invisible. And sometimes late at night, I think about the woman I was when I walked into that elevator, the one who thought she had to choose between safety and honesty, between love and self-preservation. I don't regret saving him. I don't regret loving him. But I learned that you can care about someone and still choose yourself, that walking away doesn't always mean failure, and that some stories don't end with forever, they just end with understanding.